meeting people who have gone through things that you're going through yourself. I think that's what is the main value.
To me, is the diversity and also the inclusivity of opinions and ideas.
We learn a lot of where this banking world is going. So sometimes you make assumptions, but here you actually see what's going on in reality.
To physically step away from our jobs and focus on that opportunity to learn and to network, I think that's one of the things that's so great about Sibos.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Sibos TV, Jack Delosa.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are we all feeling after an amazing Sibos? Good, fantastic. As we saw from that short video, it's not only been an insightful week, but an incredibly impactful week. I know at Sibos TV and right throughout the exhibition, there have been some incredibly meaningful conversations and connections being made. So well done on making this event what it has been thus far. Welcome to the Closing Plenary. This is one of our final keynotes for this particular week. As I said in the introduction, I'm Jack Delosa from Sibos TV. In this particular session, we'll be hearing about the week's takeaways from SWIFT's Deputy Chairman Stephan Zimmermann and SWIFT's Chief of Asia Pacific and EMEA regions, Alain Raes. Following that, we'll have Professor Genevieve Bell give her keynote on the intersection of technology and humanity, which I know is one that we are all very much looking forward to. However, before we do that, we have a challenge that will hopefully not only demonstrate some cool tech, but also be a bit of a laugh as well. As we all know, this week we've been hearing a lot about instant payments, specifically here in Australia, the NPP. And so we thought, what better opportunity and time to see the NPP in action right here in this very hall. Many of you may know the charity for Sibos this week has been the Boys and Girls Brigade. The Boys and Girls Brigade provide disadvantaged youth with education programs to equip them with their skills for the future. Earlier in the week, SWIFT donated 40,000 euros to the Boys and Girls Brigade, which I think deserves a huge round of applause for the people from SWIFT. So, for the Aussies in the room, we thought it was time for us to perhaps top up the 40,000 euros with some real-time NPP-enabled donations for the Boys and Girls Brigade. This is going to enable us to do two things. Firstly, see NPP in action live in front of our eyes, and secondly, of course, donate to an incredibly worthwhile cause. In order to make that happen, please join me in welcoming to the stage two incredibly powerful people, Bill Doran, Head of Oceania for SWIFT, and Sarah Eisen, Executive Officer at the Boys and Girls Brigade. Please give them a huge round of applause. Welcome to the stage, Bill and Sarah. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Bill has actually offered to be the intermediary for this particular transaction and demonstration. He's actually sharing his mobile number with all of us and has kindly offered to be the go-between. Now, that does mean that the money's going into Bill's account before it goes to the Boys and Girls Brigade. So, Bill, let me just clarify, there's witnesses. It is going to go to the Boys and Girls Brigade, am I correct?
I promise.
Okay, we have his word. Now, what I am going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is I'm going to kick us off right now, technology providing. And while I do that, Bill, talk to us about how the audience can join me in donating to the worthwhile cause.
Sure, so you can see my bank account up on the screen at the moment. As you can see, it's a zero balance, so we're going to change that very quickly. One of the neat features of the MPP is the ability to make a payment to a Pay ID, which is a mobile phone number or email address. In my case, it's a mobile phone number, which you can see up the top in the white writing. So for those of you with MPP-enabled accounts, I encourage you to start donating. Oh, we've already got some coming through. And if you don't have an MPP-enabled account, you can use my BSBN account number and use the old-fashioned way of doing it. We've put a big white box over the details of the payment, so you won't see your name appear, so you don't have to be embarrassed about the amount that you donate. But the purpose here is to have a bit of fun with real-time payments. So please don't come to me for tax receipts, because I won't be having the ability to send them to you. But I promise I will be transferring all funds on Monday morning to the Boys and Girls Brigade in Sarah.
Fantastic. For those of you who aren't Aussies amongst us, if you've got notes and coins that you'd otherwise don't know what to do with, or you might, put back into your own currency when you get home, pass that to any people around you who are Aussies, and they can add it to their donation into the NPP. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be live for the opening, for the rest of the closing plenary. However, these details will only be up for another 5 or 10 minutes or so. So if you want to do this, do it now. If for whatever reason you can't do it now, take a photo and do it throughout the presentation. But that is a total of $608 so far. Sarah, is that two thumbs up from you so far? Beautiful, beautiful. Bill Doran, Sarah Isis, thank you so much for joining us. And Sarah and Bill, we applaud the work that you do. Huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Now it is time to welcome two incredible people to the stage. We have Alain Raes, the CEO of Asia Pacific and EMEA at SWIFT, and Stephan Zimmermann, Deputy Chairman of the SWIFT Board of Directors. However, ladies and gentlemen, I'll ask you to hold your round of applause while we watch this short film. Thank you very much.
For those of you old enough to remember the $6 Million Man, the best of humankind and the best of technology blended together. That's essentially what I think banking will be of the future. And all we're saying is that the technology piece at the moment is growing in importance. But there'll always be a role, and it's about the banks that can get that blend from a operational and delivery point of view, but also a customer experience point of view. Getting that blend right, that's the bank. Those are the banks that will succeed and continue to thrive in a fast-changing world.
We're moving from an era where that personal attention with individuals and people are moving to robotics and algorithms. And the trust in who has my data, who uses my data, who can see my data, is a really important dynamic that we need to deal with.
And this is one of the key themes I think we all need to think about here, is how do we transition from this product-centric approach to an experience-centric approach.
In order to make things more efficient, give people access to financial services, as we lower the friction and improve the customer experience, we're also moving from physical distribution of products to digital distribution.
I think one of the reasons why we're well placed in the region for innovation is the nature of the business models of the market infrastructures. So they tend to be vertically integrated. They are listings businesses, they do trading, clearing and settlement. They can think about the whole value chain all the way through from the creation of a security all the way down through to the holding and safekeeping of that security.
The rise of entrepreneurship in Asia. Right now people believe, wow, we can do something by ourselves and we can create something benefiting the society and good for the human beings.
Mobile phones are ubiquitous and they enable financial inclusion, which is another imperative in this region.
I think it's obviously truly exciting for entrepreneurs to be able to go out and say we can change 500 million lives for the better. We can, and it's not just about payments, it's also about financial inclusion.
Financial services is in a dogfight to get the best and brightest people.
Everybody needs to learn how to work with fourth industrial revolution technologies. And until you do that, your education is incomplete.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's unbelievable that the 4 days of Sibos are almost over. And I have to say, what you don't see, but we do, first of all, we have been perfectly received, and the hospitality in Australia has been just great. But what I see here is still that count of what all our Australian friends are actually donating to this charity. So I think from time to time I may refer back to that. So Sibos is almost over, and we talked a lot about technology and innovation, as we have just seen in that very movie. But we just learned that it's not just only about having the right technology stack and apply the right architecture to your systems, and then you are in an innovative company. I learned that the human aspects, or as we sometimes say, the soft factors, play an equally important role. It means only companies seem to succeed that are having agility, but also a level of curiosity, and enabling the people to learn and also to foster, with curiosity, to embrace change. So as Shane Elliott, the CEO of ANZ, mentioned, he sees only these companies being really successful who can adapt to scale and speed, and therefore are willing to embrace change, have the right people in their organization who are listening to what's going on, who can look beyond the scope of probably what's happening in your own industry, and particularly with that mindset are also embarking on new journeys, which may not all work out. Now, Alain, particularly in your region here, Asia, which is more and more becoming being at the forefront of innovation, how do you see this is playing out in the long run?
Well, I guess that, well, yes, indeed, you've seen this throughout the week, but let me be clear first, right? I mean, innovation does not only happen in Asia, it happens everywhere from Americas to Europe, Middle East and Africa and to Asia. But yes, perhaps, it is more visible here. It is perhaps going a bit faster here. You've had a lot of examples during this week coming from, yes, the NPP, $1,760 to the charity. So it starts from there, but also many other initiatives that you see in other parts of the regions, like in China, like in India, in ASEAN as well. Perhaps actually one of the reasons that I see into this is that obviously many of those economies are booming, they're developing very fast. They also have had the opportunity, the chance to study more from an empty sheet than others have had as well. And then as these companies are booming and growing, you have this move, of the middle class to the middle class. So you have in those regions, tens and tens of millions of people moving to the middle class. And what do? They consume, they buy smartphone, they want to have another experience, they use internet, and obviously it comes to a certain time to using financial services. And that's where also in our world, where the innovation is coming. And it's really perhaps happening more here. And of course, I mean, the fact that these are big economies, it is more impactful, and you're talking about the masses, right? In China, you have now companies in e-commerce that have 400 million clients. I mean, I'm not sure you can have this in territories like Europe. So that is perhaps more visible as well. I have to say also that in some instances, governments, authorities are pushing for this. Central banks creating funds, like in Singapore, for instance, pushing for innovation. In regulations pops in as well, like in India, where they moved, they created this unique ID for anyone. Nobody had an ID before in India. They moved to this digital ID, and in 3 years, you had 1.3 billion people having a digital ID. Then they moved to creating a payment system in real time, and actually off you go, and it creates a lot more innovation moving forward. Now, this being said, at the same time, for those of you who know Asia, I mean, Asia is also having its fair share of challenges, right? I mean, and it's very wide, very large. It talks about consequence of massive urbanization, environmental consequence and all that. But when it comes to our business also, I mean, in our business as well, I mean, cyber is another one. And obviously, I mean, as this world is becoming in Asia increasingly interconnected, cyber becomes also a very growing threat on our industry, but also in many other industries in Asia. And that's perhaps some of the next themes we'd like to touch upon here. So if we can have now the next video.
The main threat is going from the dark web, not from the governments, not from the terrorists, not from the hacktivists, and now it's going from organized cybercrime, and we have to do something with that.
It's also no matter how good the technical controls are we build, at the end of the day, we've still got this organic human matter controlling it that is so continuously subject to these attacks.
More and more it will become the most important work. It almost should be kind of 50% information sharing and collaboration and 50%, managing the things that you need to do.
The challenge, I think, is that we continue to look at technology as being a solution to build what I'd call a bigger wall or a better wall. But I actually don't think that's the answer.
This is about risk management, and exactly the same way as we now all far more accountable around work health and safety, we need to be far more accountable around cyber risk.
Saying about honour amongst thieves, they're collaborating. And so if they can collaborate effectively and use that advantage to defeat us, then what are we doing?
When an organization follows a certain standard of cybersecurity, and then they contract and share data with other third parties, if those third parties aren't also following the same standard of cybersecurity, it's compromised.
Those firms that are able to work with their end customers to protect, detect, and recover will be competitively advantaged in the future.
3 to 5% of global GDP is tied into financial crimes. It's a tremendous number. The aspect of crime is almost unfathomable.
There's a recognition there are some criminal threats that span information, span jurisdictions, are serious, persistent, and we will not be able to disrupt them unless we work together against them.
So along the way, if everybody did have full transparency, which I really would love to see, law enforcement would have such great information.
I think we have to be very careful as an industry not to hide behind regulatory in the way that it is today, because one day somebody will come in and not play by the rules.
We usually don't cut off women, do we?
No, we don't do that. It's the consequence of being live, right?
Okay.
Now, perhaps, Stephan, two facts just following this video. First, I guess that you all know, right? I mean, the World Economic Forum is giving ideas about how this cyber threat is developing. A few years ago, they were claiming that cyber threat was among the top 8, I think, global cyber risk. A few years later, they talk about the top 5. Now it's getting to the top 2, top 3. So that is still increasing. And the second fact that despite those developments, yet it appears that 75% of the members of the community of the financial industry still actually feel quite uncomfortable and unprepared to facing this massive threat that are developing as the industry is developing in that sense. So for me, it's quite important to realize that ultimately, this cyber threat all goes back to one of the major, actually perhaps the single main pillar of the banking industry, which is trust. I mean, you don't have trust in the banking industry, it's all go away. And therefore, to me, if the industry is not capable to bringing the right response to this globally and collectively, that then trust will be under attack. And then eventually you may have other companies that eventually do not enjoy yet the trust that the banking industry has and getting really into the business and taking actually the market share that the banks will be losing to this. So it's really serious matters that banks have to collegially sort of response together. Now, it is, for me, the trust goes also with communication. It's all about making sure that banks are exchanging, are sharing experience, and trying to take all together lessons of what is happening in our industry. And what we see is that this is not really happening the way we'd like to see it, right? There is some take-up, but certainly not to the point where we believe this information sharing should happen. So I'm turning to you, Stephan, as a banker. How do you see actually the industry now responding to this? How can they work better together to attacking this threat?
Cyber is indeed a big threat, and particularly it doesn't kind of react to the same mechanics we've been used in other threats that were actually also jeopardizing trust. But when you look at, there is very little international framework, let alone legal base, to effectively deal with cybercrime. it's probably a bit of a response why banks and institutions are individually trying to cope with these challenges. I think, in my view, the only thing we can do is to kind of use our existing mechanisms and the way we've been dealing with one another. Because there we know these platforms, we have already built trust, and I think in this context, when I look at SWIFT, it's like with CSP, you know, where, of course, the banks are already in a trusted network. They know how to talk to one another and share information on different issues. So in my view, we should be using that and really build on that, because there we have the trust, but we also have the strengths of the network to really foster collaboration. What I always think, and we had also during this week, of course, many debates where is all this cyber attacking coming from? And in my view, it doesn't really matter so much where it's coming from. The problem is that it's there, and I couldn't care whether it's now nation-state initiated or at least tolerated, because the reaction for us as an industry will always have to be the same. We have to collaboratively get our act together and collectively answer to these challenges. And I think that already leads me to our next subject. I think collaboration is not only important now to fight cybercrime, but also in other aspects, and I think our next video about payments will also refer to that. Please, the next video.
I think the real future will be more about collaboration and partnership. Because what the fintechs do well is that customer experience, is knowing what that customer wants in a broader ecosystem.
In the fintech space, you have to know that there are large investments that are made now in RegTech and cybertech.
So far, yes, GPI has absolutely helped provide a greater level of transparency in the payment space. I think for GPI to be really, for us to feel the full benefits of it, we need to have greater adoption.
A smooth, payments process will give the consumers no time to have a second thought.
If blockchain is a successful technology and we get to that unimaginable day where there's a single one for everything, that's going to be good for us.
When we talk about legacy systems, too, in this payment space, we often couch them as if they were outdated and should be gone versus the new technology. And the reality is those legacy systems get updated by virtue of new technologies.
What you want for innovation to foster is this ability to have many participants in that environment. So, you're not only just creating competition, but collaboration in this vibrant infrastructure.
Now that all of us, I think, have connected and actually work and create this new ecosystem, I think we're actually driving towards delivering much better solutions, and we will see that banks are still relevant.
Those institutions that will win are those that put the customer at the center, those who embrace data and extract value out of it and prioritize it as a critical component for success.
How do we get beyond this adopted system that we have that is keeping us anchored in yesterday's capabilities, not today's?
I think there's an element of it's a new technology, we've got to find a use for it. We've had cryptocurrencies. Well, why can't the government issue these things now? They're not talking about replacing cash. They're talking about whether or not there might be a need for an alternative, a complement.
So I think that the bank of the future needs to be thinking about how they leverage data as a strategic asset to grow the business.
So before I comment on this, just to let you know, we're now passing easily about 3,000 Aussies being given to donations. It's already good progress, so keep going, please. I mean, there's more to come. So when it comes to this very challenging environment we have in our space, especially in the payment space, I would say that my first immediate reaction is that somewhere I'm quite happy personally, because at this point in time, I don't have my friends or my family that is telling me that I'm working in a boring industry and I have a boring job. That's over. They're all saying no, it's actually highly sexy, all cool. pool, and it's a great feature for others. That's a good advantage. But yes, I mean, you've heard about this. I mean, in this video, the industry, the payments industry is radically changing, very fast developing. You've heard also the big name nowadays, right? They're not necessarily, I mean, the names of the banks. You heard about Alipay and Tencent. All those industries are growing very fast, and somewhere, you know, are representing threat for the industry. And I think somewhere also the legal environment that we have is pushing for this in different way that I just mentioned before. At the same time, I do believe that they're not looking really for the same thing. I'm not sure yet, and perhaps I'm wrong, that all these new entrants in the payment space are really there to developing a payments business. They're essentially there to sort of enhancing the experience that a client can have around the platform they're building. And those platforms, most of the time, not about payments. They are about trade. When it comes to Alibaba, they are about searching for the company. So I think the business model that they have is radically different. Of course, at the same time, you know, it is changing the landscape. It is changing the environment, and it creates obviously new opportunities for collaboration. And the only way, as you've seen in this video, to I think surviving in this new environment where you have fiercer competition, new entrants, is really by collaborating and eventually also using those new technologies that you've heard of, you know, during this week, the APIs and all this, and those eventually through open banking can really forcing collaboration and leading to obviously new innovation. And I'm convinced that you know innovation leads to more innovation, and that's going to be a very nice virtuous spiral. Now, when it comes to innovation, I'd like now to quickly moving to sort of the closing topic that we've here. You know that traditionally we have an award in this closing plenary, so it's already the third time that now we have this Swift Institute Award that we're giving to students, right? And this time we've been very much fortunate to have 30 groups of students, 30, coming from different universities of Australia, each of them reflecting on problems that you have, the challenge that we have in the fashion industry, and trying to find the right response. And this time, in coordination with the Australian National Member Group, we came with one problem that we'd like them to fix, right? And that problem is really about how can you save, or can you actually protect data privacy in the context of open banking, APIs, and you know, this kind of situation. So that is really the theme. We've selected already 8 of them. They all came at Sibos this week. They've had a chance to, you know, to meeting, I hope, with many of you going to the innovation floor and all that, and discussing all of this. And obviously, you have a winner in all of this. And I think it is all chance to giving the name of the winner. But before I'm doing this, right, there's another thing I need to do. A lot of things that I need to say today. Is one, there will be actually a poll that we're organizing before we have our speaker. And if you go to Slido, I think you have the instructions somewhere, go to Slido and you can already start voting for that poll, and Stephan will give you the results of that poll. Now, we're now coming to the time of giving you the name of the winner, and we're getting like in Hollywood, right, or like in Paris when it comes to France. So, and the team is Hebe, right? And we'd like to welcome Marco Lecci and Andron Rosario on stage, who are both coming from Monash University. So I'd like also to add that actually congrats.
Congratulations.
So there is a prize of 30,000 Aussies to these 2 gentlemen for this, which is not bad, right? Yeah, it's 20,000 euros. We could have actually paid this through NPP, but well, I mean, especially that NPP doesn't have a limit. We could have done that, but we won't do that. I'm not sure you're coming from here, right? Okay, we could have given you a check, but that wasn't looking good, so voila, so you have them later on. Okay. Voila, I guess that we need to take a eviction now, right?
Will we eventually share the solution they have found for us to protect the industry? Or
I hope you will, right?
Yeah, I will, definitely. You will. Yeah. Okay. We'll for a small fee, you're willing to. Okay. Yeah.
A picture. Yeah.
Great.
Stephan, with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So
thank you very much again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now I leave Stephan to introducing your external speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alain. And thanks very much also all the other teams that have taken part in that contest. And as you've heard from our questions, of course, we are in need for additional talent and solutions. So I don't know whether we already have a bit of that response from our Slido. The question for those who have not access to the app at the moment was, which area of your life will artificial intelligence help out the most? Because this is the very nice bridge to our next speaker, where I have this great pleasure of introducing to you Professor Bell. She is a scientist, an anthropologist, a technologist, and a businesswoman. She is a distinguished professor at the Australian National University, a vice president and senior fellow at Intel Corporation, and Florence Violet Mackenzie Chair. As she says herself, and I like this sentence, she sits at the intersection of cultural practices and technology adoption, being a cultural anthropologist by training, but also by predisposition. So, in other words, her job is to make sense of what makes us people tick, what delights and frustrates us, and to those insights, and use those insights to then eventually help shaping the technology of the next generation. So, as a bit more background, Professor Bell joined the ANU College of Engineering and Computer Science just recently, meaning in February 2017. Before that, she has spent the previous 18 years in Silicon Valley, helping drive Intel's product development by developing the company's social science and design research capabilities. So, like you, I'm looking forward immensely to hearing from her. Genevieve, please, to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, that's a daunting list of accomplishments. I'm really nowhere near that interesting, but I am at least that tired. It's my incredible pleasure to get to stand on this stage and to talk to all of you. I know I'm the last thing standing between you and Sydney sunshine and freedom, so I promise I'll make it worthwhile. I also know that what we're going to do is change gears a little bit here. I want to pivot from a week's worth of conversations, 300 hours, they tell me, where you've been talking about things explicit to your sector and in some ways about the present and the near future. What I want to do instead is move to the distant future and talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and its impact on all of us and on the challenges it will present in our work lives, but also in our lives as citizens and human beings and consumers, because those all matter too. So, you heard lots of descriptions of me just then, but here are the things that you really need to know. So, I'm the child of an anthropologist, hence an anthropologist by predisposition. I grew up on my mother's field sites in central and northern Australia in the 1970s and 1980s. That meant I spent most of my childhood living with Aboriginal people here in Australia. I was in a series of communities with people who remembered their country before Europeans and fences and cattle. It means I spent all of my childhood without shoes. I spoke Warlpiri, which was the local language in the community I grew up in, and I got to kill things and then eat them, just in case you worried. And it was arguably one of the very best childhoods a person could have. And it was an extraordinary privilege to get to see my own country that way. And I'm sure in the week that you've been here, you have been welcomed to our country by Aboriginal people. You've gone through the rituals of being acknowledged that we stand on that country. I want to add my voice to that. I want to acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Gadigal people, the traditional owners of this area. And for me, there's something really powerful about imagining that we get to talk about the future and about what it will be to be human in a place that's been occupied for 60,000 years. There's something genuinely remarkable about that legacy. For those of you who are visiting, you are welcome to the place that is the oldest continuously occupied cultural place on the planet. It's also the place with the oldest cultural technology. The oldest single piece of technology that we know that any human built was built here 25,000 years ago. And it's a series of fish traps in a river about 250 kilometers east of here, well, west of here. East would be in the ocean, going out west. So, you might pause there and think, what is a woman doing who talks about Aborigines and being barefoot speaking Warlpiri doing in a big tech company in Silicon Valley? Because it is a very long way from Ali Karang to Intel. Now, I made a stop along the way. I went to Stanford and did my PhD in cultural anthropology. I studied Native Americans. I wrote a history about a boarding school. I didn't know Intel existed, even though it was only 20 miles away, because anthropologists and industry didn't match and didn't meet. And the way I ended up at Intel, it's not career advice for you nice young men with your 30,000 euro check. I met a man in a bar. Like I said, it's not career advice. I met a man in a bar in Palo Alto and he changed my life. He asked me what I did. It's because he was American. I said, I was an anthropologist. He said, what's that? I said, I studied people. He asked me why. I should have known he was an engineer at that point. But I just, blundered onward and said I studied people because they were interesting. He said, what did I do with that? And I said very smugly that I was a professor. And he looked at me and said, couldn't you do more? And I thought, yes, I could stop talking to you. And so I did. And I left the bar, and I didn't think much more about it, except he called me the next day at my house. And we're talking 1998, so before Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn or Tinder, long even before Google. These days, if you open up Google and type red-headed Australian anthropologist into the browser, you get me. It was the first search term that returns back. But in 1998, my friend in the bar did this the old-fashioned way, and he called every anthropology department in the Bay Area looking for the said red-headed Australian. And the secretary of the anthropology department at Stanford said, oh, do you mean Genevieve? Would you like her home phone number? So I got my job at Intel because I hung out in bars and Stanford had bad privacy practices. I kept my job at Intel because it turns out knowing what people care about, what they're passionate about, what frustrates them, what's important to them, those are pieces of information you absolutely have to have if you want to build the next generation of technology. You can't just do what's technically possible. You actually have to do what makes sense to human beings. You listen to a whole series of people get summarized on this stage 20 minutes ago saying, we can make the technical system, but it's that complicated human bit. Well, it turns out the complicated human bit is actually how you inspire better technology. And listening to human beings and then infusing what it is that they care about into how we make technology, that's always been my job. It was my job at Intel, it's now my job at the Australian National University. I've somehow managed to keep both jobs. Time zones are not my friends. If I could just get my own currency, and apparently the phone number from over there, we had a bet going in a good Australian manner about how much money we'd donate. I lost when we hit $2,500. What are we at now? 3,200. For the Australians in the room, you are letting down the side. I'd put his phone number up again, but I think that probably violates privacy practices too. So, what do you do with all of that? What does it mean to think about human beings and also to think about the future? Well, partly it means I think you have to think about what are the kind of technical systems you need to build, but I also think you need to imagine what are the skills that you will need to manage the future. What are the systems that are coming and how do we think about them? And most importantly, I think for this sector and every other one I can think of, how do we take those systems safely to scale? Because it turns out the safety piece and the scale piece are where all the hard work exists. And it is to that end that this graph came out now 2 years ago from the World Economic Forum. I know you've heard people over the last week talk about the fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution. I'm willing to bet some of you have encountered it elsewhere in your lives. This graph was published, like I said, 2 years ago. It's excellent. It tidies up all the history you don't remember studying at school. It gives you a nice chronology. First there were steam engines, mechanization, then there was electricity and the production lines, then there were computers, then there is what the World Economic Forum calls cyber-physical systems. Now, of course, there's a couple of things going on in this chart, right? Thing number one is that it suggests that the history and progress is linear, and that's helpful, but not always true, particularly if you think about the time frames those happened in other places. The other challenge with this, of course, from where I stand, is there's no people in this. It's all about technology. There's no notion that humans had these systems appear in their lives, and it changed the way they thought about time and space. It made new businesses. It created new crises. It created new challenges and also new opportunities. And if you look at each one of those moments in that chart, there's a signal technology, like the most important piece of the technology, but it's the system that got built around it that's interesting. So whether it's steam engines that gave way to railways, what it took to make a steam engine wasn't what it took to make a railway. Those are completely different in some ways, both technical skills, but also regulatory skills and business skills. What it took to think about electricity and mass production created all manner of things, different kinds of transactions, different capacities to make business and to make money. Computers, well, they made digitization possible, but it wasn't until we had things like the web that we really got to leverage their full skill. Now, here's the thing. Each one of those previous waves necessitated the creation of a new set of jobs and a new set of tasks and a new set of questions. Each one of those waves created a new academic discipline. Engineers appeared for that first one. That second wave brought us electrical engineers and also MBAs, because it turns out when you have mass production lines, you make money in a completely unexpected way. And you have, chief industrialists in Philadelphia rocking up to the University of Pennsylvania and go, make us a better businessman. And of course, what you get is the Wharton School of Business. That third wave necessitated computer scientists, not mathematicians. First computer science curriculum didn't get built until 1968. But it was all about how did you take a series of small pieces of machinery and get them to scale. Here's my question. What's it going to take to bring that last wave to scale? We talk about the fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution. We talk about a whole series of pieces of technology that it accompanies. Internet of Things, big data, algorithms, artificial intelligence. At the moment, those are all small things, sometimes installed in a big way, but they're small. What's it going to take to make it big? The moral equivalent of here, what will it take to go from effectively AI as the steam engine to the metaphoric railway? What will that take? Well, partly it would take actually starting to think about what we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence and how we would define it. And here I don't simply mean advanced data analytics or augmented decision-making or automated processes. I mean the business by which we are talking about a full technical system that runs from data through algorithms, machine learning techniques, sensors and sensing, and rationales that hold all those things together. And many of us in the room touch pieces of that, whether we're working on the back-end systems, whether we are working on the things that will flow across those networks, whether we are building processes that will ultimately be made smarter. But the challenge here is how are we going to take all of that stuff and get it to scale? So I said the World Economic Forum talked about cyber-physical systems. You might want to pause there and think, yeah, what is that exactly? It's not a very helpful descriptor, but here are some of the objects that it would describe. Autonomous vehicles, drones, robots, smart elevators, the awful ones that don't have buttons inside, that give you that faint sense of trauma whenever you get in. If you're of a vintage where you like to control the lift, we will be old one day. And we will be very frightened by lifts that control themselves. Turns out Douglas Adams was right. Who knew of all the pieces of science fiction he would contribute that prescient lifts would be a thing of the future? But that's the category, right? Autonomous objects that have some capacity to move in the real world, not on your phone or in a computer, but in a physical object that is then powered. Well, it turns out, if that's the world we're talking about, there are 5 critical questions we need to be thinking about almost instantly, and they reflect in all of our businesses and across your sector and many others. First question you have to ask is, okay, you said autonomous cars and lifts. Just how autonomous are they, and what do you mean by that? We were talking backstage earlier about whether autonomous systems meant that they were conscious systems, and if they were conscious, what would happen next? Because one of the things in English is we have this incredible semantic slippage. We say autonomous, you hear sentient, conscious, self-aware, and for those of us who grew up in the West, it is a very small step to Skynet going live. and killing us all. Now, it turns out things can be autonomous without necessarily being conscious or self-aware or sentient or out to kill us. Intel hates it when I say that on stage, but it's true. That's not a necessary progression. So what do we mean when we say these systems will be autonomous? Well, we may simply mean that they are going to make a set of decisions without reference to a pre-approved script. They're going to actually have some localized ability to decide things for themselves. Now, it turns out most technical systems are going to have limits on that. Go back to my smart lifts. Mostly they can go up and down. It's fairly hard for them to go sideways. They can be autonomous within a framework. But who gets to decide that? Who gets to decide what autonomy looks like, how it's manifested, particularly in your business, who's regulating it, who's setting the controls, who's doing the scrutiny? What would it mean to have those autonomous objects flow across different boundaries? Because it turns out autonomy in one place may not look the same somewhere else because you're conditioned to make sense of one world, not another. Australia recently experienced a series of autonomous vehicle trials here with a European car company who built the car with a series of inbuilt notions about hazards, particularly things by the side of the road. All of them were modeled on things that had 4 legs and locomoted in a straight plane. So cows, goats, donkeys, horses, camels, in this case, elk and caribou. In Australia, we have kangaroos. They do not locomote in a straight 4-legged motion. They go up and down. The problem is if you're an autonomous vehicle and the kangaroo goes up, you can see right underneath of it. And the future is right there, and there's nothing in the way. The thing about a kangaroo that goes up is it inevitably comes down again. But then it's much closer to you. So here you had a system that it was autonomous, but it was autonomous for somewhere else. So how are we going to think about localizing things to different conditions, to different notions of what it means to be autonomous? Even if you could resolve that, there's a second order of questions, which are about who will set the controls and limits on that? If the vehicle is autonomous, is it designed just to be in one particular place? The state of California, the state of New South Wales, just Holland, but not Belgium. What would that look like? And if it wasn't those things, how would we decide? Who sets the limits? Who sets the controls? Do they live inside the object? Do they have to live somewhere else? Do you have the moral equivalent of an override? If you're talking about vehicles, in lots of countries in the world, our security and our emergency services, so our fire trucks, our ambulances, our police vehicles, would like to be able to get all the cars off the road so that they could get through. Do we let that happen? And if so, who gets to decide that? Think about it in your business. What would be the moral equivalent of deciding that transaction couldn't happen? Who would set those limits? Are they set nationally, internationally? Is there a standards body? Who would be on it? And how would those things be made visible and explicable? Because it turns out if you could solve the problems of things being autonomous and things having some set of controls, you have an enormous set of challenges about what we increasingly think of as assurance, but you know as risk, trust, liability, privacy, manageability, explicability, ethics, and ease of use. Because all of those things are going to come into play here. How do you know you can trust the lift, or the autonomous vehicle, or the smart building, or the drone, or the automatic financial transaction service that is busily funneling money into my friend's bank account? How are we going to decide those things can be trusted? Who's going to decide where the risk and liability sits? How will we decide who should explain those things and to whom? These are all open questions. Some of them are being litigated in the context of the GDPR in Europe. Some of them are being litigated in the context of conversations about ethics. But imagine now we're not just talking about algorithms, we're talking about physical objects that you will live in, that you will work with and around. What it means to have a conversation about safety here, huge. And who should be in that conversation, even more complicated. Because now we're talking about objects that exist inside a whole series of rules, all of which are pretty complicated. Next down that pathway is, of course, the question about metrics. So if you could decide that the vehicle or the object had autonomy and that there were rules and it was safe, how would you know it was a good object or not? The last 250 years of the Industrial Revolution have preceded with the notion that efficiency and productivity gains were the most important metric of a technology. It saved you time, or money, or space, or labor, and that was excellent. It's not clear to me those are the metrics we want to use for the systems that are coming. In the autonomous vehicle space, it's clearly about things like safety, congestion. For the lifts in most buildings, it's actually about saving energy, and that's probably a good thing. It turns out, as of June of 2018, about 10% of the world's energy budget was spent on server farms. That's an enormous amount of energy to power the cloud. Thinking about what it would mean to have a world of systems that require more and more movements of data is also about systems that require more and more energy. And while companies like my own, like Intel, are committed to decreasing the power budget generation on generation, we're also increasing the density of devices. So how do we want to think about the metrics that we would use here? Because one of the things I know about having spent 20 years in a manufacturing company is you make what you can measure. So what are the measures? How do we want to think about these systems? How do we want to think about what makes good artificial intelligence or bad artificial intelligence? It isn't simply, is it going to come to kill us? It has to be something else. And then last but by no means least, hugely important for me, is the question about how's it going to feel when these systems exist? You heard people all the way through this week, and even in the last hour, sit here and talk about, will we need new jobs? Will we be replaced by technology? There's a first order of questions. How will we even know these systems are what they appear to be? What are the ways we want to signal that the system is operating autonomously? Do we even need to do that? I'm sure most of you live in places where if you have a young driver in a car, you are required to put some kind of license plate indicator to suggest, don't get behind them when they reverse parallel park. They may have agency, they may have autonomy, but they are limited in their efficacy. We know how to flag objects that aren't fully quite right. We know how to think about signaling for the lifts, that the buttons are going away. Most of us still haven't worked out how to use the signaling, so how are we going to make it easier for us as humans to live in these worlds? But also, how are we going to interact with these systems? Most of you have already gone through multiple generations of moving to dealing with a touch screen, sometimes with voice, but we're also talking about systems that could be ambient or invisible. All the metaphors we have for human-computer interactions don't scale that way. You do not want to get into an autonomous vehicle and in order to have it operate, have to remember your 18-digit password, uppercase, lowercase, hex key, and a few alphanumeric characters. You also don't want to have to talk to it, because if we live in a world where all of us talk to all of our technology all of the time, that is a kind of cacophony of horror. And biometrics isn't always an answer. We know from the United States' most recent government interactions that we have had the theft of 1 million fingerprints, well, actually 10 million fingerprints of 1 million individuals. It's one thing to be told to replace a credit card and get new password. It's a different thing to be told to replace your fingerprints. So how we think about living in a world where these technologies are smart, possibly doing our jobs, is a set of conversations not just about how will those systems be engaged, but how will we engage with them? And how will we feel when certain tasks that we are used to being good at, there is machinery that is better? Whether it's the healthcare system that you all said was AI's first touchdown, because indeed, having computer vision objects look at your pathology scans is better than a human. Computer vision reads your pathology scans with more accuracy. It doesn't get sleepy after lunch. It doesn't want coffee at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it doesn't need to take a bio break. It just relentlessly churns, and it learns over time. So of course, those will be good things. But if you're someone who read those things for a living, it's very hard to imagine a machine that will do it better. So what it means to think about that fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution isn't just thinking about the next generation of technologies. It's thinking about the next generation of human, social, technical systems. It's about thinking about who are the people that are going to help shepherd that world into existence. What are the technologies we'll need, but also what are the skills we need? What are the regulations we will need? What are the checks and balances we will need? And from where I sit, what are the conversations we will need in order to be prepared for the world that is coming? Here's the thing about being an anthropologist, though, increasingly I realize all we do is ask questions and never answer them. And I realize that's very unsatisfactory. At the end of 300 hours of people telling you many things, I've given you lots of questions and answered none of them. Here's the only thing I can contribute to that. It increasingly occurs to me that those questions and that next wave of the Industrial Revolution requires more than we already have. If that first wave of the Industrial Revolution brought us engineers, and the second wave brought us electrical engineers and business people, and the third wave brought us computer scientists, I want to know what the fourth wave is going to bring us. And more to the point, I want to build it. So I spend my time straddling a job at Intel and a job as a professor, and in my days as a professor, what I'm committed to doing is trying to build that next branch of engineering, that next body of knowledge, that next applied science. I have a small institute at the Australian National University. 12 weeks ago, we committed to teaching our first university master's level courses next year. We had 10 slots that we could offer to students. We gave them 5 weeks to apply. We got 173 responses from all over the world, which was more than I possibly imagined. We're now in the process of working out how to admit that first class and how to create our first master's program next year. Because here's the other thing I know from 20 years in Silicon Valley. It might have taken us 250 years to get here, but we don't have that much time and we don't have that much luxury. So if you're sitting here thinking, fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution doesn't apply to me, you're wrong. It may not apply to you today or tomorrow. You may get a few more years before you have to start thinking about the consequences. But these questions about whether the systems you build are autonomous and who gets to decide that, what their limits are and their controls are, how we will engage with them, how we will measure them, and how we will make them safe, those are questions not for technologists, those are questions for all of us. As leaders in the financial services sector, as consumers, as citizens, and as human beings. Those are the questions you get to answer, not just me. So with that, I'm going to stop and say thank you.
All right, thank you, Genevieve. You made me think, and I think you made all of us think. One thing, for example, that chart on the fourth industrial revolution from the World Economic Forum, I must have seen that 100 times. I'd never realized that there were no people in it. And I now realize that not only do engineers not do people, I guess the same goes for MBA and economists. And I'm an MBA with an undergraduate degree that did some computer science, so I'll be true to type by starting to look at a screen. And the screen here is the one on Bill's bank account. I don't know if we can pull that up. If we can't pull it up, I can see it here. Ah, there we go. And we are at 3.3 thousand Australian dollars. The transaction count is at 200, I think. So thank you, all the Australians here in the room, for contributing. Thank you very much. So in spite of being an MBA and a bit of engineer that really doesn't do people, I have to say I truly enjoyed interacting with people here at Sibos. It was a great Sibos. I met many old friends, many new ones. So as always, I stand here completely exhausted and completely inspired. Thank you very much for that. I will do the formal part now, which is to take off my tie and declare this Sibos closed. On to the party. And thank you, Sydney. Can put up the picture of Sydney. Thank you, Sydney. And on to London next year. Thank you.